Shalom, everyone. This is Jeremy Cohen. I'm the director of the Mishkan Research Project, and I'm here today to talk to you about this. This is a replica of the Royal Egyptian Cubit that I ordered from Germany. Comes as a cardboard kind of piece of two pieces of paper. You kind of fold it together and glue it together. Underneath it has the English standard and the metric. But this is a Royal Egyptian Cubit. In the English standard, it's 20.62 inches. I believe in the metric it's about 53 centimeters. So why is this unit of measurement so important in history? Why is this particular length, 20.6, 20.6264 or so important? And why the varying lengths, and why do you find different lengths of different standards? We're going to talk about that today. What I believe is this. The Royal Egyptian Cubit was the cubit used by the pharaohs. Every pharaoh had his own personalized cubit. But those pharaohs received that cubit down all the way back to their forefather, Mitzrayim, which in Hebrew means Egypt. Egypt comes from the Greek aguptos, transliterated into English, that's Egypt. But the forefather of the people of Egypt during the time of the Exodus is Mitzrayim, a descendant of Noah and a descendant of Ham. Okay? And so what happened? What do I believe happened? Here's what I believe happened. What happened was Noah used that cubit measurement, a very, very close measurement to the Royal Egyptian Cubit, to build the Ark of Noah, to build Noah's Ark. How do I know this? How do I believe this? It's because when you go to Turkey, in eastern Turkey, there's a structure that they discovered back in the around World War II, where there was a gentleman who was flying over. I believe he was either Russian or American, can't remember, but he saw a structure that looked like a boat, and I believe it was Russian, and they sent Russian investigators to look at it, and they didn't seem to find anything. They also sent an American team to go down there to check out this boat-like figure. You can see it up there on the screen, to see if this would be something like Noah's Ark, and they didn't see anything in it, and so they left. Then Ron Wyatt came there in the 80s and did a bunch of tests and seemed to have verified that this isn't just a geologic structure. This is actually a man-made object that's been preserved. When they went and measured this structure with the Royal Egyptian Cubit standard, it actually measured lengthwise exactly 300 cubits, exactly what the Bible says. And so because of the location of this structure, and because it aligns with the measurement of the Royal Egyptian Cubit, exactly what the Bible says, and because it's been verified through various machinery, sonograms, and so forth, that this is definitely a man-made structure, you've got 3 to 4 solid points of evidence that this very possibly and probably is the remains of Noah's Ark. And so that leads me to believe perhaps maybe Noah used this exact length standard to build the ark with his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so let's dive into that a little bit. This Royal Egyptian Cubit, you can see that it's kind of a gold-looking cubit. It's actually kind of a replica of a cubit pulled out of the tomb of Ka, who was a pharaoh during the 18th dynasty. It now resides in Turin, Italy, in a museum there. I believe it's called the Museo Egizio in Turin, where also, of course, is housed the Shroud of Turin. And so let's dive into this proposition I just made, that Noah used the Royal Egyptian Cubit to build the Ark. Okay, what does that mean? It means that Noah, the cubit of Noah, was a pre-flood, pre-diluvian standard. As in, one of the questions I have is, well, where did they get this standard? Where did it originate? And what I believe is that this standard originated because people were larger. They were bigger back then. And we see in the Bible, it talks about the Nephilim. It says that, and there were Nephilim in the land in those days. But I don't believe that that is translated entirely correctly in most Bibles. What it says in the Hebrew is Hayu Nephilim. They were giants. They were giants. They all were giants. Compared to the person who was writing this historical document, this recollection or recording of what he saw, apparently this person was of a lesser size than they used to be before the flood. Now, how do I know this? You can really kind of look into the ages of the humans before the flood. We know that most of them lived up to 900 years old. And we know that the farther back we go to creation, the less sickness there was. Pre-flood conditions and environments were much different. A catastrophic global event like a global flood would have drastically changed the atmosphere and the environment of the world, which would have dramatic effects on every living creature on the planet, which could range from the length of time that creatures lived to the size that they grew. We know that in the fossil record, we see a lot of mammals with an average of 4 times larger mass and twice the length or height. We know that there are documented records of skeletons of human beings that have been found to be over 10 feet tall. And these have all been suppressed, of course, by the Smithsonian, because the Smithsonian Museum doesn't want this evidence to be out there in the public, because it goes contrary to the theory of evolution, which is a widely, if not completely accepted theory for the origin of man in all the public education arenas. So that's why these findings of giant human skeletons have been suppressed, because there is an agenda among a certain group of people to suppress this, so that people don't get the idea that maybe evolution may not be a true theory or a true way to think about our origins. Okay, but let's go back to my proposition, my theory, my speculation that the Royal Egyptian Cubit dates back to a pre-flood standard. Okay, now how could they have possibly came up with this particular length of 20.62? It seems to correspond with maybe the average length of a person's elbow to tip, which is in, I believe, Latin cubitus, means elbow. It means the measurement from the elbow to the tip of the finger. Now, I disagree that this cubit originated with the measurement that is the average between the elbow and the tip of the finger. Everybody has different sized forearms and so forth, so it's not entirely correct. But I believe before the flood, what this length measurement was the average length of a human foot. I'm going to let that sink in a little bit. The average length of a human foot. Jeremy, you're telling me that you believe that the average length of a human foot was 20.62 inches? Yes, I do. Because of the fossil record and the large skeletons of humans that we find, I believe that humans averaged 12 feet tall. Males averaged 12 feet tall, which would make their feet exactly 20.6 inches. It's true. And the foot is a 1/7 ratio to the height of the body. So if you measure your foot, you're probably going to come very, very close to it being 1/7 of your total height. You can probably go to the bathroom and check it out for yourself, but go ahead and finish this video first before you do that. So it does fit into proportion. Now we see after the flood, okay, so the world has changed. The earth has now been flooded completely. The fountains of the deep have exploded. Perhaps there was a massive explosion into the atmosphere where a lot of the water had, frozen and fallen back down as snow and sleet and hail caused the ice age, and the canopy that I believe was around the earth at that time with an ice crystal perhaps helped with the reflection of more UV light. There was more oxygen and there was more air pressure. So these multiple variables actually contribute towards preserving life to be more for living organisms to live longer and have a more optimal lifespan. Okay, if you can imagine that. So yeah, the pre-flood conditions were much different. And after the flood came, after it destroyed the earth and every living creature, and Noah had to start from scratch, rebuild, he had the standard with him. And you can just imagine, if they're building an ark, Noah would have a cubit, so he could measure things, right? They had many various forms of measurement. They had rope to measure with, it would be like their tape measure. And he would want their sons each to have their own cubit also, which I would assume or suppose they would have copied the length of their father's cubit. So, that just makes kind of logical sense to me. So after they got out of the ark, the whole world is now been wiped off, wiped away, blank canvas. They have to now start measuring out their new homes and their new structures and furniture and land and everything. How did they do that? They had a preserved standard on the ark. They brought it with them. They knew that the world was going to be destroyed and that they would have to bring all their tools, all of their building tools and measurement standards so that they could rebuild. That's just a very logical kind of perspective there. So they land, they get out, you see everything's gone. Maybe there's a few little shrubs growing because, there's some plants left behind, but nothing much else. And we find there in eastern Turkey called the Valley of Eight, there where we believe that they settled and built a home and had flocks. We find what many believe to be the grave of Noah or the grave of Noah's wife, which was a hole dug about 13 feet long. I have a friend who has a secondhand witness account from a first-hand witness account of Noah's wife that was discovered by Ron Wyatt back in the 80s, where they dug up the grave because they found a tombstone, and I could probably put it up here to show you what the tombstone looked like. Has people here, and the second one has their head down. This is a reference to Mrs. Noah. And they found her grave, and it was said that she had millions of dollars of jewelry on her. And I can't verify this in any way. It's just a story that was told to me. But it was told that he had a local with him from Turkey that went into the black market and found somebody to actually take all that and take Mrs. Noah and take all that jewelry to the black market. But anyway, of course, they wouldn't want that body found, that skeleton found, because it's a giant. So they needed a standard to measure things by. Normally, as a contractor, I've been a contractor for 20 years. I have done so many hundreds of measuring rooms and giving estimates, and a lot of them, most of them, I would say I walked them out with my feet. And this is just a natural thing to do. If you're measuring something out, you're not going to get on your hands and knees with your forearms and go like this. It's just not going to happen. Your most natural instinct to measure something out to build from the ground is to measure it out with your feet, either a heel to toe or just to do a casual walk and know how much steps equal what. Like one step is 1 yard or whatever. I know my gun coach, Stephen Powell, he measures out distances of shooting with his stride, and he knows that certain amount of strides are going to be 25 yards, 15 yards, and so forth. So it's very easy to believe that that's just the normal way people do things. You're never going to go down on your hands and knees and measure like that. It just doesn't happen. So I believe that because there's evidence in the fossil record that people were an average of 12 feet tall, or they were taller than us. And also in the fossil record after the flood, we see a shortening of human heights from 12 to 10 to 8 to 6. And we also see the shortening of life. As God had recounted, he's going to shorten man's life to 120 years. And we see that first fulfilled in Moses and Aaron at 123 and 120. Okay, Moses was 120. In fact, it's crazy because I'll make an exception for him because being in God's presence probably preserved his life even further. So probably like a good dog, God just decided to put him down early. He probably would have lived into 150, 160 years old, just like Abraham and Isaac. But you do see a tapering of age from post-flood, from a 900 Noah to his sons having a little bit shorter lifespans, to his grandsons having a little shorter lifespans, to the seventh and eighth generation, tapering down to 180, 160, 150. I believe Abraham was like 200 years old. I think Isaac was probably 180. Jacob was 100, 140 maybe, and Joseph was 130, and then Moses was 120. So you have a tapering of age right there, and you can check all those ages for yourself. Also, as a side note, before the flood, you can see there in Genesis, and I'll probably post the reference down there, that there is a age limitation to being able to reproduce and sire children for the males. We see a lot of the ages were between 50 and 60 and 70 years old before they could sire the first child. That means the ability to reproduce, the development was a lot slower. Okay, and if they were bigger, your average baby was 40 inches long and 28 pounds. So, there's just a lot of differences in the pre-flood conditions and things that were on. These are still speculations, but based on what I've studied and what I've seen, and these things can be further verified in the future as I do more research. But it seems to me, according to biblical account, you've got longer periods to reproductive maturity. You have longer life, which leads to the ability to optimize genes to grow at an optimal size of 12 feet. As we go on through generations and generations, now in the 21st century, we have many mutations and many diseases. We have limitations in environment, and the world has changed, and therefore we've become shorter, smaller, and we live not as long. Okay, so that's what I believe about the Royal Egyptian Cubit. Originally, it was the standard used before the flood as the average length of a human foot. At 12 feet tall, you have a 1:7 ratio of 20.6 inches, and it just transferred over to the new form of man, which is 6 feet tall, 185 pounds, in which their foot is about 10.3, half a Royal Egyptian Cubit long. If you are 6 feet, check the length of your foot. It's probably somewhere between 10.3 to 10.5 inches long on average if you are a normal proportioned human being. And that's just a half ratio to what we were originally. 12 feet tall, now we're 6. We were 800 pounds, now we're 200 pounds or 185 pounds. We were about 750 pounds before the flood. It's a big human being, a lot of strength, a lot of power, probably 10 to 20 times stronger than the average man today. But we don't have those optimized genes anymore. Therefore, we have resorted to a lesser form, which goes contrary to the theory of evolution, which says we started out weaker and smaller, and now we're smarter and bigger. It's not true. We were actually bigger, stronger, smarter before the flood. We just used it for evil, so God had to wipe us out, except for Noah's family. So thank God for the faith of Noah, right? And he is just a magnificent example of somebody who just simply obeyed God, and that's why we're all here today. And so I want to jump into now the use of the Royal Egyptian Cubit by Moses, the leader of Israel who led them out of Egypt. Moses is an interesting character. He was raised in a Egyptian home, but first in his early toddler years, he was raised by his mother. And so I would presume possibly at that time, he got a little bit of history of who he was, his identity as a Hebrew. And I believe maybe earlier on he might have known already he was a Hebrew. But nevertheless, he was raised in Pharaoh's house after all the customs. He learned the history. He learned the ancient documents. He definitely knew about the Royal Egyptian Cubit. This was just common knowledge. Everybody had a cubit. Everybody had a cubit who worked in construction, who worked in the royal projects of the pharaohs, who built the pyramids, who built the structures and statues that were commissioned to build. So because this was just the standard measurement, he would have most likely and probably used the Royal Egyptian Cubit to build the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and all of the furniture associated with it. it would have just been a no-brainer, at least for me, but I never just like to throw things out there without verifying. But because he was raised in an Egyptian, royal Egyptian home, that was probably the cubit that was referred to by God, the Amah or Amot in Hebrew. We built the Holy of Holies last year, and the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the golden altar, and the menorah, and everything else that belonged to the tabernacle. We built it based on the royal Egyptian cubit, 20.62 inches. And it would be no surprise, like I said, Mitzrayim, father of Egypt, grandson of Noah, would have inherited the royal Egyptian cubit from Noah and Ham. So, you know, the English standard foot, it's a long-standing standard in England and in America, okay? Standard English measurement of the foot. And so it's very probable that the royal Egyptian cubit was preserved from Noah to Moses, okay? And going further, even from there, we see Solomon now taking the royal Egyptian cubit, I believe, taking the royal Egyptian cubit to build the first temple in Jerusalem. It mentions here in Chronicles, and I'll put the verse up here so you can see that he referred to the old standard. Because now, obviously, apparently there was a new standard now accepted in Israel that they were using to build things. Solomon reverted to the original standard that was used to build the Mishkan, okay? And so here are some of the pieces of furniture we built. Here's the Ark of the Covenant. Here's the menorah. And here's the Mishkan. And this was all patterned after the royal Egyptian cubit. And I wish most or many of you could have seen this. It was actually destroyed by the monsoon floods or the monsoon rains. But I'm hoping to rebuild it as a permanent structure one of these days. And let me answer one more question I said I would answer, is why are there varying cubits around the world? There's one theory that states that maybe the cubits that were copied so much that they were off by a good amount. You know how when you cut pieces of wood and you try to cut them by sight, or you try to copy in a copy machine, it just turns out fuzzy after the 100th copy of a copy of a copy. It may be that these sizes vary because the human eye isn't exact, and people may be in a rush to copy a standard, might not have gotten it exactly perfect, okay? And also countries tend to want to adopt and maybe wanted to divert from a country that they disliked, and say, we're not going to keep their standards, we're going to make up our own standards because we're our own country. So that's probably another reason why you have varying standards and why it didn't stay consistent throughout the world. Every nation is its own nation. Every nation has its own standards, okay? So, anyway, thank you for tuning in, guys. If you don't mind, if you would please like and subscribe to my channel. There's going to be a lot more great content. I'm going to be starting to make some gifts and replicas of the 10 Commandments. Those are coming out hopefully before Christmas, if not shortly thereafter. I look forward to producing more content for you. And thank you again for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one. God bless you.